Hey everybody, Chad here. In this video, we're going to talk about how to manifest $20,000 immediately. What steps should you be taking to start today, start now, to manifest $20,000? Now let's get rocking and rolling and let's jump into this. Now what I wanted to do quickly here, share with you one chapter out of The Invisible Power by Genevieve Behrend. Okay, now I'm going to set the premise and we're going to jump into this chapter because this is the best chapter out of the book, The Invisible Power, and I'll put the link down below just in case you want to read it. But I pulled out the best chapter. It's only about 4 to 5 pages, but I really want you to kind of sit back and really pay attention and really listen to the steps that she took to manifest $20,000. Plus, keep in mind, she wrote this book back in 1921. So what I did was, I actually did a short little Google search, so I'm very accurate. In the 1921 or 1920s, $20,000 today would actually be around or close to, very, very close to $300,000. So that kind of gives you kind of reference. If I said, okay, let's sit here and manifest $300,000 in 2023, I mean, how many people would think I would be crazy? You know what I mean? Even 20,000 today is a nice chunk of change for you to manifest it, come in, but you don't know where it's coming from. You know what I mean? So 20,000 back in the 1920s was a lot of money, and she manifested it. And to kind of give you a premise what's going on, why she wanted the money, is Genevieve really wanted to study with and be Thomas Troward's first student. Now, Thomas Troward was very, very famous at the time for kind of studying and teaching mental science. And mental science back then was pretty much the law of attraction, the law of assumption. And still, you still hear the term mental science today, but he was crazy famous back then for teaching this. But he taught it, he explained it, but he didn't really mentor people. He didn't really have students like we do today, like you see, all over YouTube or so forth. So he didn't mentor nobody. So he kind of talked on it, wrote books on it, wrote manuscripts on it, but he didn't have any students. But what she wanted to do, she wanted to personally study with Thomas Troward. She wanted to personally be his first student, and she wanted to be mentored by him personally. So she wanted $20,000 to actually be able to move to the side of the country that he's in and be able to live there, maybe pay him and not have to worry about money. So that's why she really wanted this $20,000. And it will be brought up a tiny bit in the chapter, but the chapter really focuses on what she did to manifest $20,000. Now, another thing I want you to do right before I read the chapter, is that, see a connection. If you're kind of following me, you're listening to this, I kind of almost assume that I'm not the only person you follow. You're not really green at the law of attraction, law of assumption. I really want you to focus in on the connection, and all the knowledge you know about law of attraction, law of assumption, all the knowledge that you know about manifesting. I really want you to sit back and really listen and really connect and see how basic these principles really are. Because all the prosperity teachers, and I'm not even throwing myself into this, I'm talking about real prosperity teachers. I'm talking about people back in the 1800s, 1900s, like Neville Goddard, Genevieve Behrend, Thomas Troward, Bob Proctor, Earl Nightingale, Napoleon Hill. A lot of these were just the pioneers of the personal development industry. And there's a connection between all of them, okay? The basics are very, very simple, but we're the ones, humans, that make it very difficult. Okay, so that's what I want you to do, is sit back, relax, and see the connection here when she's kind of going through the steps that she took to manifest $20,000. Now, this chapter is from The Invisible Power by Genevieve Behrend. This is chapter 9. It's called How I Attracted to Myself $20,000. Remember, this was written back in 1921. In the laboratory of experience in which my newly revealed revelation to divine operation was to be tested, the first problem was a financial one. My income was a stipulated one. quite enough for my everyday needs, but it did not seem sufficient to enable me to go comfortably to England where Troward lived, and remain for an infinite period to study with so great of a teacher as he must be. So before inquiring whether Troward took pupils, or whether I would be eligible in a case he did, I began to use the paragraph I had memorized. Daily, in fact, almost hourly, the words were in my mind. My mind is a center of divine operation, and divine operation means expansion into something better than has gone before. From the Edinburgh Lectures, I had read something about the law of attraction. And from the chapter of causes and conditions, I had gleaned a vague idea of visualizing. So every night, before going to sleep, I made a mental picture of the desired $20,000. $21,000 bills were counted over each night in my bedroom. And then, with the idea of more emphatically impressing my mind with the fact that this $20,000 was for the purpose of going to England and studying with Troward. I wrote out my picture, saw myself buying my steamer ticket, walking up and down the ship's deck from New York to London, and finally saw myself accepted as Troward's pupil. This process was repeated every morning and every evening, always impressing more and more fully upon my mind Troward's memorized statement. My mind is a center of divine operations. I endeavored to keep this statement in the back part of my consciousness all the time, with no thought in mind as how the money might be obtained. Probably the reason why there was no thought of the avenues through which the money might reach me was because I could not possibly imagine where the $20,000 would come from. So I simply held my thoughts steady and let the power of attraction find its own ways and means. One day, while walking on the street, taking deep breathing exercises, the thought came, my mind is surely a center of divine operation. If God fills all space, then God must be in my mind also. If I want this money to study with Troward, that I may know the truth of life, then both the money and the truth must be mine. Though I am unable to feel or see the physical manifestations of either, still I declared it must be mine. While these reflections were going on in my mind, there seemed to come up from within me the thought, I am all the substance there is. Then, from another channel in my brain, the answer seemed to come. Of course, that's it. Everything must have its beginning in mind. The I, the idea, must be the only one and the primary substance there is. And this means money as well as everything else. My mind accepted this idea, and immediately all the tension of my mind and body was relaxed. There was a feeling of absolute certainty of being in touch with all the power life has to give. All thought of money, teacher, or even my own personality vanished in the great wave of joy which swept over my entire being. I walked on and on with this feeling of joy, steadily increasing and expanding until everything about me seemed aglow with the radiant light. Every person I passed was illuminated as I was. All consciousness of personality had disappeared, and in its place there came that great and almost overwhelming sense of joy and contentment. That night when I made my picture of the $20,000, it was with an entirely changed aspect. On previous occasions, when making my mental picture, I had felt that I was waking up something within myself. This time, there was no sensation of effort. I simply counted over the $20,000. Then, in a most unexpected manner, from a source of which I had no consciousness at the time, there seemed to open a possible avenue through which the money might reach me. At first, it took great effort not to be excited. It all seemed so wonderful, so glorious to be in touch with supply. But had not Troward cautioned his readers to keep all excitement out of their minds in the first flush of realization of union with infinite supply, and to treat this fact as a perfectly natural result that had been reached through our demand? This was even more difficult for me than it was to hold the thought that all the substance there is, I am. I, idea, am the beginning of all form, visible or invisible. Just as soon as there appeared a circumstance which indicated the direction through which the $20,000 might come, I not only made a supreme effort to regard the indicated direction calmly as the first sprout of the seed I had sown in the absolute, but left no stone unturned to follow up that direction by fulfilling my part. By so doing, one circumstance seemed naturally to lead to another, until step by step my desired $20,000 was secured. To keep my mind poised and free from excitement was my great effort. The first concrete fruition of my study from mental science was expounded by Troward's book, had come by a careful following of the methods he had outlined. In this connection, therefore, I can offer to the reader no better gift than a quote Troward's book, the Edinburgh Lectures, from which may be derived a complete idea of the line of action I was endeavoring to follow. In the chapter on causes and conditions, he says, to get good results, we must properly understand our relation to the great impersonal power we are using. It is intelligent, and we are intelligent, and the two intelligences must cooperate. We must not fly in the face of the law, expecting it to do for us what it can only do through us. And we must therefore use our intelligence with the knowledge that is acting as an instrument of a greater intelligence. And because we have this knowledge, we may and should cease from all anxiety as to the final result. In actual practice, we must first form the ideal conception of our object with the definite intention of impressing it upon the universal mind. It is this thought that takes such thought out of the region of mere casual fancies, and then affirm that our knowledge of the law is sufficient reason for a calm expectation of a corresponding result, and that therefore all necessary conditions will come to us in due order. We can then turn to the affairs of our daily life with the calm assurance that the initial conditions are either there already or will soon come into view. If we do not at once see them, let us rest content with the knowledge that the spiritual prototype is already in existence, and wait till some circumstance pointing to the desired direction begins to show itself. It may be a very small circumstance, but it is the direction and not the magnitude that is to be taken into consideration. As soon as we see it, we should regard it as the first sprouting of the seed sown in the absolute, and do calmly and without excitement whatever the circumstances seem to require. And then later on we shall see that this doing will in turn lead to a further circumstance in the same direction, until we find ourselves conducted step by step to the accomplished of our object. In this way, the understanding of the great principle of the law of supply will, by repeated experiences, deliver us more and more completely out of the region of anxious thought and toilsome labor, and bring us into a new world where the useful employment of all of our powers, whether mental or physical, will only be an unfolding of our individuality upon the lines of its own nature, and therefore a perpetual source of health and happiness. a sufficient inducement surely to the careful study of the laws governing the relation between the individual and the universal mind. To my mind, then as now, this quotation outlines the core and the center of the method and the manner of approach necessary for coming in touch with infinite supply. At least it, together with the previously quoted statement, my mind is a center of divine operation, constituted the only apparent means of attracting to myself the $20,000. My constant endeavor to get into the spirit of these statements and to attract to myself this needed sum was about 6 weeks, at the end of which time I had in my bank the required $20,000. This could be made into a long story, giving all the details, but the facts, as already narrated, will give you a definite idea of the magnetic condition of my mind while the $20,000 was finding its way to me. The end. Now, to me, that was a fantastic chapter, but what I want you to do is really sit back and see the connection of what I just read to other things that you know in mental science, law of attraction, law of assumption, and see the connection there. Okay? A lot of this stuff is basic stuff, but we make this so hard and difficult because all of us, including myself, all of us have bad habits. All of us have teeny tiny bad habits that we do. Some of us have scarcity habits, poverty habits that are just ingrained in us from little on up as a kid. But see the connection. That's your homework here. See the connection with all the other material you know that you read, you listen to, and sit back and see the connection. That way you have to see the connection first before we can start working on the little bugs, the little things, the little bad habits that we do. But other than that, my friends, hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next video.